It seems my husband has changed completely. I plan to give our house to Susan, and if you disagree, we will get a divorce. He wants to transfer our house, which is in my name, to our eldest son's wife. That woman needs to leave quickly. She's turned my husband against me. I'm changing the house title to my name. I can easily handle the monthly mortgage of $1,800. It seems my eldest son is on her side now, but I don't care about this old house anymore. I'll just move out. I'll make sure all three of you regret this. Get ready. My name is Grace. I'm 60 years old and work as an executive at a big company. I live with my husband, Robert, who is 2 years younger than me. Last year, we renovated our house for our future. The house was built by my father and was quite old. We wanted it to be more comfortable as we grow older. The loan is high at $1,800 a month, but it's manageable. I was told I could get the loan because I have a good job, while Robert manages a small restaurant and earns less than I do. It's tough to keep paying off the loan with just my salary. The house used to belong to your father, and now it's in your name. I feel bad, but could you pay the whole amount? I'll contribute more to our living expenses. We agreed to renovate the house, and it turned out so beautiful and comfortable. I was so happy that I could live in the house where I spent my childhood. But now, I never imagined I would have to leave this house someday. Then I received a message on my phone. My eldest son, Jack, called to tell me he's getting married. Jack is 31 and works as a section chief at a major company. He has always been dedicated to his studies and work, so I was surprised to hear about his love life. I was curious about the woman he was marrying. If Jack likes her, she must be special, but I wondered if she was trying to take advantage of him since he lacks dating experience. I was both excited and anxious to meet the woman our son was bringing home. The day finally came when I met her. A young woman with brown hair and a white dress introduced herself. "Hi, I'm Susan. Nice to meet you," she said. She had great manners and made a good impression. "Nice to meet you, Dad and Mom," she smiled, showing her bright teeth. I thought Jack could be happy with her. Robert felt the same way, quietly saying, "She's a good girl." "I'm glad to hear that, sir," Susan said, holding Robert's hand and looking into his eyes. I was surprised by how close she was to him. I pulled back a little, and Jack looked surprised. Robert didn't seem bothered at all, but I felt uneasy. I wasn't jealous, but it didn't feel good. "What are you doing?" I asked Susan. "Thank you," she replied, flustered. "I shouldn't have done that on our first meeting. I'm really sorry." She quickly let go of Robert's hand. "I often hear that I don't understand personal space," she continued. "I don't mean any harm. It just happens. I'm really sorry." She seemed nice, but her behavior surprised me, even though I liked her at first. Jack, on the other hand, was smitten with her, and he admired her boldness. "Susan might not understand personal space, but that's a good thing," he said. "She approaches people, and I'm shy, so that's why I can be with her and think about marrying her." I was shocked to see the usually introverted Jack change so much because of Susan's behavior. "I trust you with Jack," I said, realizing she was a good person. I approved of their marriage, and everything moved quickly. They got married a few weeks later. I truly wished them all the happiness in the world. 6 months after their wedding, I came home from work one day and noticed a woman's shoes by the entrance. In the living room, there was Susan. "Welcome back, mother-in-law," she said. The table was covered with empty cans and bottles. They had been drinking. "What is going on?" I asked, surprised. "Why are you having a drinking party without Jack?" "Well, when I got home from work, I bumped into Susan. She wanted to get to know me better, so we decided to have a drink. I'm a bit broke before payday, so I suggested we drink at home," she explained. "Why have a drinking party here? It would have been better if Jack was with you. I don't want to intrude on the newlyweds. They could have drunk at their own place," I said, tilting my head. "It would be fine at our place, but it's such a mess right now, and your house is beautiful," Susan said, slurring her words a bit. She usually spoke politely, but she was acting casual because of the drinks. "Why didn't you invite Jack?" I asked. It seems unusual for a daughter-in-law to come to her in-law's house alone for drinks, especially as newlyweds. Susan started to cry. "Jack is always busy with work and doesn't have time for me. I'm feeling so lonely." "Shush, Susan, it's not your fault," I said. "The one to blame is Jack for leaving his newlywed wife alone." Robert began to console Susan, stroking her hair. "Oh, Daddy-in-law," she exclaimed, and it was a bizarre scene that made me feel nauseous. "Hey, Robert, Susan is your daughter-in-law. This is disrespectful to Jack. You shouldn't act like this." I scolded him for his inappropriate behavior. Please don't scold daddy-in-law, Susan defended Robert. Her response was so absurd that I couldn't help but feel confused. I wanted to say more, but after a tiring day at work, I didn't have the energy. I'm going to take a bath, please clean up, I said with a sigh as I headed to the bathroom to escape. Then I called Jack to explain the situation. He said he would stop working and come pick Susan up right away. I thought Susan was a bit odd, but Jack must really love her to leave work for her. However, I worried it might be challenging for him to live with her after marriage. Even though I might not be the best mother-in-law, I decided to offer Jack some advice on married life when he arrived. Time flew by as I soaked in the tub, lost in thought. I felt a bit lightheaded when I headed to the living room, where I found Jack had arrived to pick up Susan. Or so I thought. Despite having driven here, he was drinking. Jack, you drove here, you shouldn't drink, I questioned him. No, Susan wanted a drink, so I decided to stay the night, he replied cheerfully, a bit tipsy. I was glad my son was staying over, but Susan had left a bad impression on me. I was honestly baffled, but Jack had already been drinking. I can give you guys a lift, I offered. I really didn't want my daughter-in-law to stay over, especially since I was tired. No, I feel bad for you, you must be tired too. How about you join us for a drink? Jack suggested with an easygoing smile. I couldn't say anything more. At that moment, something felt off. Suddenly, Susan cracked a mischievous smile, almost as if she was laughing at my confusion. Was it just my imagination? I tried to convince myself that it was just a misunderstanding, but Susan's clever plan had already begun. The next day, Susan kept apologizing for her behavior. I'm truly sorry, she said before leaving, and I felt relieved as if a storm had passed. However, that evening, when I got home, Susan was there again, and Jack was nowhere in sight. I felt a sense of despair. I'm sorry to disturb you again, but I really wanted to apologize, she said, offering me some sweets. I guess I got carried away, my bad. Robert looked remorseful. It was a bit annoying, but they seemed to be reflecting on their actions, so I decided to let it go this time. Thank you, I said, because Susan felt awkward about the situation. She stopped coming over. Honestly, I didn't want to deal with her much, so I was grateful for this outcome. But then one day, Robert came to me with a serious look. I have something to talk about, he said, just as I was wondering what it was. Jack and Susan came home. It's been a while, I greeted them, but for some reason, they ignored me. I was confused. Suddenly, Robert shouted, I'm giving this house to Susan. If you object, we're getting a divorce. What? I was taken aback. He was giving the house to Susan, and I couldn't understand why. Mother-in-law, please leave, Susan said. What does that mean? I was in chaos. What do you mean you're giving the house to Susan? Robert answered, you've been bullying Susan all this time. Bullying? That's ridiculous, I argued, but Robert wouldn't listen. Shut up, he yelled. That's why she was crying and couldn't come home until now. Jack chimed in. I didn't think my mother would do something like this. This is seriously messed up. The more I denied it, the angrier they became, and Susan was crying. That's why I'm divorcing you. Get out now, I'm staying here with them. Why should I give my house to Susan? I asked. Because Susan is deeply hurt, Robert said. Normally, we should demand compensation, but I think it's better to take your house and give it to Susan. That way, you'll feel the consequences. I didn't bully her, why do I have to suffer? Besides, how can Susan, who quit her job after getting married, pay an $1,800 loan? He replied, don't worry, the title will be in Jack's name. With Jack's salary and previous employer, we can change the title easily. But changing the title is difficult when there's an existing loan. If it were that easy, anyone could buy a house. Robert insisted, you work for a big corporation, and so does Jack. Plus, a friend of mine works at the bank where you have your loan. I think we can work something out. I couldn't understand where his confidence came from. An $1,800 loan is no big deal, he said with a laugh. Jack, brimming with confidence because of Robert's words, turned this into a real situation where I might have to hand over the house. I repeated, I haven't bullied her, so I won't give up the house. When I objected, they both exploded with anger again. This is too much. As I was getting fed up, Susan, who had been crying the whole time, spoke up. Mother-in-law, for the sake of this child, please, she pleaded, stroking her belly. No way, I replied, shocked. Susan is pregnant? My mind raced. If she's emotionally unstable, a miscarriage could happen. But I still wouldn't give up my house based on these unfounded accusations. I was perplexed. Just leave me alone for a bit, I said and went to the bedroom. Bullying? Have I unknowingly been horrible to Susan? As I lay on the bed, riddled with worry, I noticed something strange. What's this? I thought, spotting a strand of brown hair on the bed. Both Robert's and my hair are black. There's no way a brown hair could be here. Wait, has there been an affair? My mind was racing with this awful truth. I felt like I was on the verge of exploding. I don't even know what's going on anymore. I cried myself to sleep. When I woke up, it was night. As I tried to enter the living room, I heard voices. It seemed Jack and Susan weren't home yet. I wished I could have a drink too. You can't, you're pregnant, remember? Robert and Susan said, full of enthusiasm. I couldn't find a chance to intervene. The mysterious accusation from Susan left me in despair, and I remained unable to enter the living room. Suddenly, I heard the sound of an intimate encounter. Oh, Susan, I love you, Robert exclaimed. Stop it, Jack and my mother-in-law will find out. You know. What the hell were Robert and Susan doing? Don't worry, Jack is passed out drunk, and Grace hasn't come out of her room for a while. She's probably sleeping. Robert laughed. Is she sulking? Too funny. The brown hair must have belonged to Susan. It was disgusting. What were these two doing on the bed I had just been sleeping in? I felt nauseous. They must have kicked me out to have a good time with Susan. Hidden from Jack, my home had turned into a venue for their affair. Fine, I'll let go of this disgusting home, but you will see consequences. The next morning, I acted as if I had been asleep in my room and that nothing had happened. I didn't want to sleep in that bed anymore. I was too shocked to get any rest. Finally, when I said, I've decided to hand over the house, everyone broke into smiles. Great, let's get the transfer of ownership done. I'm sure I can get a loan approved in no time. Jack was excited. This kid probably didn't know anything. It made me sad, but I wouldn't tell my son the truth. He didn't listen to his mother and was completely controlled by his wife, at least not yet. Days passed with the hustle and bustle of divorce procedures and the transfer of ownership. It was tough, but we somehow managed to change the ownership. From today, it's no longer your house, Robert cheered. Get out of here, old lady, Susan whispered into my ear, and it pissed me off. I'll leave, you don't have to tell me. Letting go of the house I had lived in all my life was sad, but it had become a place of infidelity, so I had no regrets left. From now on, I'll mess with these three and their odd relationship. You all will be sorry for what you did. About a month later, after I moved out, I finally felt ready to confront them. I returned to my former home and rang the doorbell. What does a stranger want here? Robert exclaimed, furious. Can I come in? I have something to say, I asserted. Why should I let you in? Robert was reluctant, but I insisted. It's important for Susan's sake. The moment I mentioned her name, he let me in without hesitation. Honestly, I didn't want to say her name. It made me feel sick, but I knew Robert was soft for her, so I played that card. An outsider is here, I thought. We were divorced, and yes, we were strangers now, but was that really the right way to say it? I was irritated by Robert's reaction. What do you want after all this time? He asked, clearly on high alert. I want you to look at this. I laid out the photos in front of him. What is this? Robert asked, confused. These are photos of you and Susan on a date. I had hired a private investigator after our divorce, and these were the results. Wait a minute, Jack shouted, shocked. What are these photos supposed to be? We're just close, father-in-law and daughter-in-law, nothing more, Robert insisted. Really? How about this? I pulled out my smartphone and played a recording. I really do love Susan. Hey, if you speak so loudly, Jack and mother-in-law will wake up. It was a recording of Robert and Susan's voices, intimate chatter. No, this is a misunderstanding, Robert desperately tried to explain. Misunderstanding? This is clearly not okay. As expected, Jack was furious, keeping his head down in disbelief. I decided to add fuel to the fire. Listen, I hate to ask, but who's really the father of that baby in your belly? Jack's face went pale. Do you mean it's with Dad? No way. My father-in-law was pulling it out every time. Susan had just dug her own grave. You just admitted it, didn't you? I said. The three of them were in shock. Suddenly, Robert and Jack began wrestling each other, and Susan seemed to cramp due to the commotion. Stop, I interrupted their scuffle. I've been saying this all along. I haven't bullied Susan. Could it be that you were lying just to drive me away and make Jack believe I was the villain? Jack looked taken aback. You're kidding, what the hell? This is messed up. I can't even trust my own mom. Jack, who couldn't trust his mother, seemed to blame himself for listening to Susan. Now that you understand all this, spill everything, Jack shouted angrily at the two of them. They hesitated to confess, but then Robert said, we have enough evidence here. Are we going to court? The mention of court triggered a reaction, and they finally began to talk. Apparently, Susan initially loved Jack, but when they visited our newly renovated and beautiful home for their marriage proposal, she wanted a house like ours. My parents' house was pretty rundown, and I was envious of the beautiful home Jack and I had. The interior was lovely too, but Susan explained her feelings through tears. The woman who wanted a house seemed to have planned to win over Robert on the day of the marriage proposal. She intentionally ambushed him after work, without inviting Jack, and drank with him. For several months while Jack was away, she nurtured a relationship with Robert and seemed intent on pushing me out of their lives. You should have proposed living together from the beginning, I said. She paused, then admitted, I have a bad image of a mother-in-law. My mom and grandma fought every day because grandma bullied my mom. I didn't want to live with a mother-in-law. I understood her reasoning. With such an image, it made sense that she wouldn't want to live with one, but the thought of stealing her father-in-law was shocking. What did Robert think about this? I wondered. I knew I was being used, but when Susan came to greet me, holding my hand and smiling, I felt conflicted. Robert, clearly in love, knew he was being used, but seemed willing to abandon me to keep her by his side. You guys are the worst, Jack shouted, and both Robert and Susan lowered their heads, shedding tears. Ultimately, Jack divorced her. When he checked the DNA of the child born to Susan, it turned out to be Robert's. I won't pay child support, he exclaimed, demanding compensation from both of them. I can't believe I'm suing my own father for compensation, he said, sighing in disbelief. I patted his head, realizing how this crazy woman had thrown us all for a loop, but in the end, the one who would regret ruining her life the most was her. Fast forward 2 years, Susan remarried Robert and decided to stick it out for the sake of their child. She enrolled the baby in daycare so she could work. Oh look, Uncle, came to pick you up today, she told her child. Though the other moms at daycare were giving her side eye, the kids got along well, but she felt isolated, unable to make any mom friends. When she tried explaining her divorce and remarriage to her own parents, they were furious, directing their anger at Robert. Since then, she had been estranged from them. All of this was her doing, and as for the house, Jack was living there alone. I wanted to sell it, but that would be too harsh on Mom. After all, it's the house where she's lived since she was born, a place full of memories, Jack told me. I understood his sentiment. I just can't sell it, he added, guilt-ridden, despite my insistence that the house felt creepy. Eventually, he had it professionally cleaned, throwing out all of Robert and Susan's belongings. Even though it was because of that woman, I did something terrible to Mom, he confessed. I know you probably won't forgive me, but please visit me, or come to the house on a whim. Let me show you some devotion. With that, he gifted me a ticket for a hot springs trip. Jack had definitely shown remorse. I couldn't forgive him yet, but I felt hopeful about working towards rebuilding our once strong relationship.